All right, there we go. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, all right. Today we're looking at the readings for next week. This is fifth. No, today's the fifth Sunday of Easter. So this is the sixth Sunday of Easter next week. So we've got back up here a little bit. We've got Paul in the book of Acts in the Areopagus talking to the men of Athens. We've got 1 Peter, which is got a couple of great things going on there. First with, being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Also, good stuff on baptism. And then the gospel, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. So good stuff all around. Just start off with the one from Acts here. If somebody would like to read Acts 17, verses 16 through 31. Start there.
While Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him, and he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." And they took hold of him and brought him to the Areopagus,
There you go.
saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So Paul, standing in the middle of the Jim, how do you say that?
Areopagus.
Okay. Said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods in the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God in the hope that they might feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he was actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead.
All right. So he's at Athens, and now he sees a whole bunch of stuff going on. He's taking in all the various philosophies, religious understandings, whatever. And his spirit was provoked within him. Kind of a charged word there that has probably more of a strong, not necessarily negative connotation, but provoked. Usually we're provoked to anger, right? That's kind of the provocation. Provoking is kind of a more hostile sort of feel to it. But it's not necessarily like his spirit was provoked, like he's angry, like he's looking and seeing all this idolatry and he's upset, which, there was a flavor of that. But also, stirred up. His spirit was stirred up within him. So not only just a sense of, he sees idolatry and he's upset about it, but he sees idolatry and he's sad. He's also, hey, we have people going to hell here because they're being led by all these various philosophies and teachings. So it's not necessarily that he's angry It's just the spirit is stirred up within him, whatever that is. As he saw the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace. So not only does he go to the synagogue where he's very familiar, but also in the marketplace where everybody else is sort of gathered to do all this stuff. We're going to get to kind of what he's doing in a second. But we've got, to kind of lead into that, we've got the Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers that he's conversing with. Now, some of these guys are talking to him, he's talking to them, and they're trying to, they want to know what's going on. Because these guys, part of their whole philosophy was, through this discourse, through talking, conversing, challenging one another, this was like a good way forward in things. So they weren't hostile per se towards him. It's not like they were, kind of like when Paul would go to synagogues and then he would be chased out or taken out and beaten and whatnot. This is part of their process. Now, you've got Epicurean and Stoic philosophers talking with Paul. So Paul is bringing a theology against these guys. Meanwhile, these guys don't agree either. They're on not necessarily opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're not bedfellows necessarily. So what is, in our understanding, what is Epicurean? What is it to have kind of an Epicurean philosophy about yourself?
Epicureans promote sensuality.
In a way. That's more of our kind of,
Modern.
When we hear, Epicurean, if you have an Epicurean
Food.
You think food, it's either kind of indulgent, hedonistic maybe, like seeking pleasures above all, just whatever is pleasurable. That's more of our kind of approach to this. True classical Epicurean philosophy was not necessarily so much hedonistic. It definitely was a pursuit of pleasure, but not in the sense of like any sort of pleasure. It was more of the absence of pain. Like you seek out, you avoid pain, you avoid suffering and all that. But it was really to achieve kind of pleasure was to be found in the simplicity of life, the simple pleasures.
Is it more like living life to its fullest at the present?
Not exactly. See, that's where we kind of go with that idea. That's like live life to the fullest. For them, it was, a simple life of tranquility and freedom of fear. That is living life to the fullest in that extent. So it's not just going out and seeking anything you possibly can for pleasure. It was just, not anything. There was still a sense of virtue in that that they wanted to uphold. But it was definitely like life is really about maximizing pleasure, not in the way we think of it, and minimizing pleasure is good, pain is bad. So that way you want to max out and minimize and max out your those sides of things. So they weren't. And when you talk about God and the divine, it's like, they weren't necessarily atheistic, probably agnostic would be a better way to talk about them. Their thought was like, if there's likely something, if there is a God or the gods, they're just not, they're not involved in us. They wouldn't even, they'd look at us and be like, ugh, I don't want to sully my hands with that nonsense. So there might have been gods, and there might have been something going on there in the background, but they wouldn't lower themselves to get involved with us. They're detached kind of guys. And death is just the end of things, which is kind of where we go. The classic kind of, not the classic, our idea is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die, right? And so this was...
Oh, we're going to go get the top stuff.
Cool, thank you. That wasn't something that like the Epicurean philosophers came up with. That was more of a pejorative thing that people said against them, like, oh, those Epicureans, all they care about is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Because they looked at that and said, well, all you care about is pursuing whatever, because all you have is today. Nothing happens when you die, you're just done. Okay? Stoicism, the Stoics on the other hand, Similar sort of thing, although they were much more focused on virtue. Virtue is the highest good, pursuing virtue. And pursuing that, pursuing virtue brings the greatest happiness. So good, bad, pain, pleasure, it's like, for the Stoics, it's like, why do you get hung up on that? Because as long as you're pursuing virtue in these things, if there's pain while you pursue virtue, then it's a good thing. Because the pursuit of virtue is good. So pain, pleasure, they look at the Epicureans and be like, you're so hung up on this. But these are just not things that we pursue. There is a sense for the Stoics that there is a God or a divine force or reason behind all things, that he has structured and ordered things and kind of providentially ordered things, so kind of fate and all that. But it's like, okay, so there's order kind of impressed upon things are lined up, but who or what that God is again, it's fuzzy, because what you're concerned about is pursuing the virtues, being a virtuous person above all things. So these were philosophies about how to live, how to live your life, how your day-to-day was going.
What did virtue mean to the Stoics?
Virtue would be, pursuing what is honorable, what is helpful, what is
To yourself or to others?
yes,
Both.
yeah, kind of classic virtue kind of stuff. So yeah, how pleasure and pain fall into it was like it could involve both, either or.
How did they define virtue, though?
How they define virtue?
No, something was virtuous versus non-virtuous.
That's a good question.
Is that by society, whatever society deemed as virtuous?
Well, they would. So
This plays into what Jim's been talking about with C.S. Lewis, which I'm still trying
Right.
to get my head around philosophy.
so the good luck. So Epicureans would. They looked at life in terms of almost like withdrawing, like the affairs of politics and all this. Like, you don't get involved in this, because it's just like that leads you into all sorts of entanglements, and your quiet life. So again, it's not this like, ooh, let's indulge. True Epicureans were withdrawn a little bit. They were pursuing a very simple kind of quiet life, because once bringing politics, you're not getting peace. You're not getting there's nothing good happening there. Stoic philosophers would actually bring in the idea of engagement, public engagement. Like, you would get involved in politics and whatnot, because pursuing those virtues. So where are these coming from? Are they coming from like see, because the various, like, some of the Roman emperors, the initial ones would have hated, like a couple of them would have hated Stoics, and then later on the other ones embraced Stoicism. So it was kind of it was come and go a little bit. Where were they getting the virtues? Honestly, I did not get that far into philosophy, into the history of all of what they were going after there. But it is what they're talking to each other about. They're bringing it in. It is a good for others, good for you, virtue. I'm not sure where exactly all this is coming from and what's defining it. But that's just kind of, this is where their background is. So, and they're very much focused on living today. Not concerned about resurrection or all this. And actually, if we would have, unfortunately, our text ends 3 verses short, because immediately after Paul starts talking about he has given assurance to all by raising them from the dead, it actually says that the people, most of the guys were like, they were put off immediately because he's talking about resurrection. And they're like, this guy's crazy. He's talking about raising people from the dead. We're out of here. So as soon as he brings resurrection up, most of the people were just like, he's ridiculous. We're not going to listen to him. But some of us actually listened and were like, tell me more. Mm-hmm. There were some who believed, or some who inquired more, and then some, and he actually names 2 people who believed. And there were obviously others probably that believed also. But he's dealing with them. So that is to say that, and if you look then, see, it's kind of, I mean, it's not important, it's not crucial to know Epicurean Stoic philosophy to understand what Paul's doing. But knowing sort of this background and knowing where these people are coming from puts a little bit more depth into the rest of it, because what is Paul doing here in this text?
He's going to the main debate place in Athens,
Mhm.
where anybody could go and debate
Right,
with others, and it's like his soapbox turn.
right. Well, but what's his purpose?
Well, his purpose is proclaim the good news.
Right, yeah.
But they, I don't know, they probably just saw it as another philosophical debate,
Oh, they totally did.
which is lots of fun. So,
Oh, yeah, yeah. But his purpose is to evangelize.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
spreading the good news.
And he does it how? He goes to where
First
they're
He goes to the people he always goes to. He goes to the Jewish synagogue,
right.
to them, and then he goes to the rest.
Goes to the rest, yes. And so going to the Jewish synagogue, I mean, he knows, of course, Paul is the Pharisee of Pharisees, right? He's chief of sinners, OIB. He's been through it. He knows his stuff. So he speaks to them speaking the language. Notice what he talks about is he doesn't immediately jump into like, hey, let me tell you about Jesus. Like, hey, do you want to have a conversation about Jesus? Does not start like that at all. In fact, what he starts by saying is like, I've observed what you guys believe. I've seen your idols. I've seen, like, I even saw you've got an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. And he's like, so I've investigated what you believe. I've spent some time here listening to you, and now I'm picking something that you have, and I'm going to build off of that.
But that's a very typical argumentative style, Greek argumentative
Yeah.
style.
Well,
I mean,
even
because-
still, because
Right.
who's he dealing with?
I mean, right. That's a classic rhetorical style to establish. Yeah, and then
Yeah. Well, no, this is all part of it. Because I mean, yeah, he's not going to go to the Greeks and reason like a Hebrew. I mean, he goes to the synagogue and he reasons like a Hebrew in the synagogue.
Mhm.
But to the Greeks, to the Athenians, he goes and he argues like a Greek.
Mhm.
But he begins with where they're at, and he doesn't talk about Jesus until later, right? Until he talks about the one that it was resurrected. So he's doing all this stuff by finding out about what shapes them, about how they put these things together, where they're coming from.
But wouldn't he already know that through his education, because they are living in a Hellenistic society? So
Well, sure.
he's from an upper class background, so he would have had tutors that would have taught him Greek philosophy,
Right.
would have taught him the rhetoric, and those are the classic things to teach. You
True.
know, so he already knew how to argue in this realm.
He would have known how to argue, but he sees their altar.
Right,
So
but
he
can
jumps off
apply,
from there.
He can apply his education to the situation,
absolutely.
knowing the culture and the.
Right, but he knows the culture, but he builds off of what is right there in front of him.
Of course, that's a great rhetorical way to start any argument.
Not everybody believes that.
I have a
classically
different
speaking,
foreground
yes.
because that's
Yes.
what I do.
Classically speaking, yes. But even knowing how the argumentation works, he builds off of
Right.
them, and not just them in a abstract sense, but them in a very direct, like, oh, look right here. Start with what's right here in front of you. What do you? Because I mean, we can talk about like, well, what did and it's.
But Rachel, we don't know that, so Pastor's explaining it to us.
Even like it's easy to like say, oh, these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, and look at them as very well, there were Epicurean and there were Stoic philosophers, and one single group for one. It's like, yeah, but there are a lot of people in various stages of that, and even ones who probably weren't completely, were they 100% Epicurean? Just like when we talk about, it's always a danger whenever, even when I talk about Mormons or Catholics or Lutherans, I can say Lutherans believe this. I'm talking in a very specific, general sense. When we're talking about individual ones, I mean, it's all over the map.
So basically, he knew how to connect with his audience.
Right, exactly. So even knowing like how to talk to Greeks and how to reason with them is like good, but you got to know exactly. I can, from 8 years in Oklahoma, I know how to talk to, I might know how to talk to Or I might go in knowing how to talk to Baptists, but that's a different kind. There's a different flavor there. The Pentecostals, depending on and honestly, even what side of town I was dealing with, had different ones. So knowing exactly who you're dealing with provides that nice little springboard, because he's dealing with them where they're at, and he sees, they are religious. I perceive you are very religious. Everyone's religious. The most strident atheist is religious. It's just, what is that religion? I mean, basically, atheism is your religion is yourself. You are the one. You are the arbiter of what is and what isn't. So he's doing all this. He's going about going to where they are, addressing them according to whatever's in front of them, and he's building on this. So and appealing to this sort of, he wants to get them to Jesus. Ultimately, he wants to get to Christ. But he starts talking about, all right, well, the God who made the world and everything in it. I mean, foundationally, we've got to agree that all of this came from something. So these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers who do not know or anything like that, at least we can get to a point where we say, well, foundationally, we came from something, right? So let's go back there. And you even have an altar here to an unknown God. So you worship something that you don't even know. Okay, so you admit that there must be something, but you don't know what that is. So he doesn't live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything. So yes, all this this worship where you say, these people who offer God things, like, well, if God created all things, what does he need from you? Since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. All right. He made from one man every nation of mankind. So we all came from something. I mean, that's a very basic foundational thing. If we all came from parents, then, you trickle back until you had to have somebody to begin it all. All right. So he's finding agreement or argumentation that they can agree with. They'd be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because they're thinking what makes sense here. And now that they should seek God in the hope that they might feel their way toward him and find him. Now, this is a huge thing. Because even, some of these guys are saying, well, God, maybe, but and then God, but the divine reason, there's something. And he's saying, look, you guys built an altar to an unknown God. All right, so you are seeking, even if you deny that you're seeking after God, you can see how you're really seeking after God. You're seeking after some overarching purpose, meaning, more to it than just this. So just like when talking to someone who doesn't believe, agnostic or atheist, I don't know many true atheists that would discount some kind of higher meaning to things. I mean, they might give it lip service, but it's like there's got to be more to it, because if there's not more, there's really nothing guiding. It's like, well, then why do you do anything for anybody? Why would anybody do anything for anybody? Why would there be any reason to do, well, it's for the good for others. It's like, it doesn't matter though. Because once you're gone, and we're all going to be gone one day, and it doesn't follow. So even in our little basic strivings, we're seeking after something.
From a humanistic point of view, though, it follows, I think.
What?
If you say, I'm an atheist, but I'm a human being, and part of my humanistic philosophy is to do good to others.
Yeah, but
I
even
encounter
still,
a lot of people like that.
well, no, and I think, see, I've heard that quite a bit too. But even that is like, well, but what does that mean though? Because, okay, if you're human and we're all human, well, but we're all randomly human. Even the source of humanity is just a random occurrence. And so when you go back to, it's like, well, all right, so then we're talking about even the way we do things, utilitarian philosophies. Like, well, it's better to do this because it's good for more people. It's like, so yeah, I've heard it, but it still doesn't quite hit for me. Like, where's this humanistic philosophy coming from, and why? Like, well, because I'm human. It's like,
Seems a little empty.
Yeah, I mean, we're at some point we're just okay. We're humans, so what separates us? You know, you don't see animals.
Well, but I think they would say we've learned from the mistakes of the past, and human society is advancing. It's getting better. It's
Oh, and I know I've heard that too, and it's like, really, is it? Are we-
History says we haven't learned
Yeah,
from
yeah,
that.
and honestly, if
I
you
agree.
learning from the past, like we haven't, because we're going in cycles. I mean, the things that there's never, human history is not that.
One of those very same people at the outbreak of the Ukrainian-Russian war
Yeah.
said to me, "Haven't we learned anything?"
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
all we've learned in the past 4, 5, 6 years is that things really didn't get better. It's just we were really good at papering over things for a while. Because even like with when Russia invaded Ukraine, and I mean people were just like, oh my God, yeah, how could this happen in this day and age? Who in their right mind would still think that land invasion was the way to go? I was like, well, apparently they did. Some guy did, right? Just like applying, when looking at our social fabric in this country, and like people would say, well, Trump, did all this. It's like he didn't do all this. There was so much. He definitely provided a way for it all too. Now it's like, he opened the box, and it's like, ooh, look at this. We had just done really good with like, let's just close this box and pretend it's not really a thing. Racism didn't go away at any point. It's not like Obama heralded in a time of enlightenment. It's like, no, just people were quiet about it. Anti-Semitism is on the rise again. It's like, haven't we learned this? No, people are terrible. So yeah, it doesn't. We're not progressing. It's just.
It depends on how you define good, how you define progressing to an opportunistic dictator. It's a prime time to strike.
Well, yeah, you got different points of view, right? Different philosophies.
Yeah.
And you're always going to have different philosophies. But there's got to be. And we live in a fun age where that's very relative. It's like, it's not. Truth isn't relative. Truth is truth. What time is it? I have to write down what I'm thinking. I'm learning. How would I tie that in? I have a thought.
I got a question.
Please.
How did the Epicurean and Stoic audience, how would they have defined truth at this point? Because Paul's about ready to drop the big one on him here with the resurrection. And, how did they define good? How did they define evil?
Well, through discussion and then arriving at, just like how any philosopher would define truth, is after, you argue enough and you show that your point of view is the right one. That, no, this is why, utilitarianism doesn't really work. This is why, the categorical imperative, is that Kant? Anyway, yeah, that isn't good. It's like, that's philosophers are great for that. They like to talk, and discuss and argue. Because if you argue well enough, you can get to that point.
You get to any point in philosophy.
Well, yeah.
Argue all enough.
Right. Which, the same goes for theology, too.
Right. Well, it is a branch of philosophy.
Yeah.
If you want to classify.
What's that?
It'd be like statistics. You can make numbers do anything if you're
Yeah.
smart enough.
Right.
It
Well,
doesn't mean it's true.
But that's where when you don't have truth, you have to construct it somehow. That's yes, statistics. What's the Homer Simpson quote? It's like, you can use statistics to prove anything. 68% of people know that. Like, oh, Homer. Or there's a great Anchorman quote where he's talking about this cologne that he's got, and he says, they've said like 60% of the time it works every time. Like, I don't think you understand numbers. Yeah, when you don't have this, and philosophers think that, the fact that we're arguing back and forth is there's differences here, so we don't have that. So in the absence of absolute truth that's like, well, everybody knows this, you just have to argue. You have to go around and just talk about it and try to make your point and explain it and say this is the rationale, this is the foundation, this is why this is the truth. You have to, because you've got nothing left, because you're coming at the point where it's like, well, truth is, we don't know. Is it what you have? Is it what I have? Well, let's argue about it. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. So Paul is coming to a place where he's like, no, this is not relative. It's not something that can't be grasped. Truth is, and the fun thing about Jesus is, grasped is not just a philosophical concept for us. Truth can be grasped. Paul, the apostles, could say we grasped it. We held the truth. We clung to him. Communion, real presence. You can say, I grasped the truth, because the truth is Christ. So this is where he's coming from. Little thing to point out here, also at the very bottom of the page, that first page printout, he says, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. He's using their own understandings and what their own literature, what their own stuff has said, to bolster his argument. So basically, using this and saying, like, look, you've got the foundation here. You've got little bits and pieces of this. You just don't see the full picture. So yeah, usually I don't like to look at Acts as a prescriptive kind of text. Like, Pentecostals will look at Acts and say, this is how we need to do church. We need to speak in tongues. We need to perform miracles because this is how the church did it. And so Acts is our guidebook. We look at Acts and say, this Acts is a history book. Right. It tells us what the first church looked like. This actually would be maybe...
That's pretty ironic that they would say that when they literally have like a bishop in Acts, like making a final decision.
Well, even this text right here, because I dealt with Pentecostals in Oklahoma where they'd say like, well, we have to do this because that's what they did in Acts, and yet I'm like, well, then when you evangelize, shouldn't you maybe understand who you're talking to and understand their beliefs and not attack them and not just go all into it saying Jesus, 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 but kind of slowly build and maybe like...
It's the basics of argumentation. Why should we learn the basics of
I know, right?
Or demonize them because they're heathens.
Right. Now, did Paul think that they were heathens? Well, yeah, of course he did. But that didn't stop him from trying to understand where they were, knowing his audience, right? And gently working and being willing to work through them and not just, like...
He didn't turn on the Jesus hose. Wait till you read that in the book.
Yes.
He gave him a cool cup of Jesus. It's in the book I'm reading right now. I'm a mystery book, and it's hilarious.
I'm sure.
My impression of this first part is that Paul realized that they were immersed in a polytheistic environment with all these many gods.
Yeah.
And so he was trying to first build a picture of that there's only one God, and that God is your Father. You came from that God.
So he's working within that in that field, right? So yeah, it's a great, and like I said, I would never look to Acts and say this is how things should be done. Although this chapter, that's probably how it should be done.
Well, actually, everybody, well, this is just basics of argumentation, like.
Oh yeah, no, it is, but for written for that day, when this was written, more of common understanding would be like, well, of course, like you show this take this book, this chapter, and give it to any of the people back then, and they would say like they look at it like, oh yeah, this is basic argumentation
because that's what they learned.
Right. You take it to anybody today, and they wouldn't necessarily go with that.
If they have a bachelor's degree, they should, because it's required in their first year course.
Oh, that's...
I teach it every year, so yes, they should know. We teach neo-Aristotelian argumentation to freshmen, so they should know this.
If they take philosophy,
But
some
see,
of us
that's-
didn't do any of this.
that,
just know
I mean,
And
that's,
that's freshman comp, so they should know this.
when I
Core
took,
class.
when I took, I took intro to philosophy, my core class, when I was to get my bachelor's, none of that. Absolutely none of this.
You didn't have this in your composition class to get your degree?
No.
You should.
No,
I
well,
didn't have that.
You forgot.
no.
It's a
Rachel,
requirement.
you're an excellent teacher. I went to Central and I took freshman comp, and all we studied was grammar and where to put your commas.
Well, you had a bad teacher because everybody has to take rhetorical.
If you take
They
speech,
didn't.
that's the
back
one
first
then.
thing they
Well,
teach
back
is to
then,
know your
you're good.
audience. So
That's
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, most
Yeah, you
people,
have to in a speech class as well. It's the same. It's just written in my.
most people would not pick up on this, and especially even if they did, it might not even be well, depending on a lot of factors. They wouldn't necessarily, especially full of Christian zeal, like, well, I need to get, full on
Jesus
Jesus
hose.
hose, right? Exactly.
It's a great term.
So it doesn't, even if you know this stuff, it's the Jesus hose blows it all out a lot of times.
Yes.
Maybe a lot of us grew up in a home where it was a Christian home, and so we knew the truth, and so we'd read this and go, well, he's trying to bring them to Christ, and it's just the truth was not relative at home.
Mhm.
And so I grew up thinking theologically, not philosophically.
Right.
So when I have to think philosophically, I'm like, huh?
Well,
And like
philosophy is
C.S. Lewis.
incredibly hard
Yes.
in general.
Yeah.
As a studying, it's harder than
It is.
we are simplifying it. It's
Oh, yeah.
incredibly difficult.
Very much so.
Maybe I'm just dumb.
No,
With
it's hard.
argument.
No, it's. I mean, it's a skill. It's an art form, really.
Oh,
It's just nobody. We don't paint in that medium anymore.
I do. I paint, but and draw. But
Our most common. Well, I mean, think of our political discourse. It's not argumentation.
It's just
It's
fallacy
yelling.
upon fallacy upon
Right.
fallacy and just garbage.
Yeah. So this is honestly this is what people are steeped in today. And I was hoping to end early. I'm not even sure if this connects, but in looking at this and like how we approach people and how we understand, you do have to understand what's going on. How they're even thinking, because I was reading an article about. And there's a ton of articles, about Gen Z and millennials, Gen Z and how, their work ethic. And there's always plenty of articles about how boomer bosses and they hate Gen Z workers because Gen Z workers, I don't know. And it was focusing on like how Generation Gen Z, they don't want, like, work is not defining them. They want the work-life balance, although probably not really balanced. They want it more like work is to support your life in terms of what you want your life to be. That work, you are not what your career is. Your work doesn't define you. Your work is there, and so it's just a supplement for you to live the life that you want. It's like, okay.
Epicurean life.
Well, yeah, kind of. Interesting. Okay. Well, then, as a Christian, like, what do you do with that? Well, as a Lutheran Christian, see, what issue would we have with that?
selfish.
Put a more Lutheran
You're
vocabulary
supposed
to it.
Love God and your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
Throw in the word vocation.
There you go.
That's a
Thank you.
Lutheran keyword.
Yes.
They love it more than
I knew
any
somebody
other.
would get it.
Yeah, it's a Lutheran catchword.
Seriously, I mean, that is our, but I mean, take away just our Lutheran word there. What we do is our service to our neighbor. What is important about, like, if you choose a career, if whatever you're doing, whatever you do to the glory of God.
That's right, yeah.
Whatever you do is to serve your neighbor. So the fun disconnect we see in this either stereotype caricature or realistic depiction of what Gen Z is, where their thought process is you wouldn't like, well, they have a terrible work ethic. It's like, no, well, I mean, they have a work ethic. It's very foreign to a Lutheran understanding of what the purpose of work even is. And so to engage that, there's a lot of stuff where you have to realize that you're not like work ethic. You're talking about work serves me, work serves neighbor. And there's a lot there that you need to, there's a lot to cover. It's not just about, well, these lazy workers, they just don't want to work. It's like, no. I mean, they do, but they see value in other things, right?
That's
So
a
you
good
need to
point.
approach. What's that?
They've got some good
They do.
Yes.
They do. Absolutely.
We're off balance. Our generation is so off balance.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Career defined my identity.
It's the difference from, so things were all here, career. So the way they went is, is swung the other way. Like, I only work so much as it provides me the life I want. Whereas, like, it's not just opposite ends of the spectrum. It
Is
doesn't.
it to provide the life they want, or is it that they have their priorities straight, that their whole life isn't their career?
I think it's they looking at from
Like an
my
importance
looking at
point of
it-
view. I'm not Gen Z.
no,
I don't
neither,
know.
neither am I.
I'm the ghosty Gen X that nobody remembers.
Hey, I'm well, technically I'm a Zennial.
If you take your
73.
career and make it the best way to serve society, then you have.
Oh my God.
It's not either or. So like, do they have a good point in some things? Like, yeah, I do believe they do, but
But you can apply that as
You
a blueprint
lose.
because you're supposed to do, everything can be your vocation, your
Well,
station
sure.
in life, it's
Right,
not
right,
just
right.
your work, get paid vocation.
right. But I mean, in terms of generally what you do outside your normal interactions, how you serve people, your job, whatever. But yeah,
I like your diagram there with career on one side of the pendulum and life on the other. I would put my life.
oh yeah, that'd be
And then I would put the cross in the middle for this is where we were, the center balance, the plumb line
Mhm.
is here.
Yeah.
That's where we wanna be.
Right.
And all this other stuff, I mean, there's good things in the baby boomer work ethic, and there's good things in the Gen Zers perception of, I've seen where
Mhm.
your
Oh,
excessive
there-
focus on career has gotten you divorced. and
right. Oh yeah,
all
totally.
kinds of
Right.
There's
stuff.
good and bad here. There's good and bad here.
Oh, but where we really, the absolute truth is to.
Right. But unfortunately, what we have today is not argumentation in terms of the classical sense. Like, let's talk about this and let's discover. It's it's this just like really unhelpful discourse, which we're not going to solve today. So, but I think that's it because we got baptism to get ready for. So,
We got good notes.
thank you. Cool.
Good notes.
Awesome. And thank you everybody online.